And thank you everybody for being here in the room and on Zoom across the way. Thank you so much to the NYU family. I'm excited to be here because normally my husband, Joe McLean, and I are here, Patrick, with your class in January. We like to come and we have a marital and political debate all on the same panel, so it's pretty exciting when we do that. Wow. Today we're going to really talk about the bridge and the divide in the Democratic Party. And I'm excited to introduce three professionals who are also good friends, colleagues with whom I've either been in a ditch or have covered the ditch that I'm in here on the panel. And let me start with John Anzalone, who is one of the nation's premier pollsters. He has led research and strategy for President Biden, other presidential campaigns. I will say, as the treasurer of the Democratic Governors Association, I'm particularly proud of the work John does with statewide leaders, the CEOs, governors across this country. He's driven a lot of positive benefits for Americans all across the country because of that. Karen Finney, you see on national and network television, where the country turns to her to understand what's happening. But mostly what's happening in her world is where she's providing strategy to help candidates like Stacey Abrams make a difference, to lead both movement work and elected work, understanding the dynamics of what the impact of policy is, as well as how you get someone in the position to make that policy. And then there is the award-winning national journalist, Jonathan Martin, who is the premier political reporter in the United States today.
Was the award Husband of the Year? Because that's the only one.
It could be, depending on what Christmas list we give you to deal with at the end of the year.
I'll blame on the supply chains.
Jonathan is known not just for his reporting at the most elite levels, but also the reporting he brings from the ground up and what's really happening in campaigns, in political and legislative battles. So let's get right to the issue. There's a part of me that feels like this is Groundhog Day in the Democratic Party again. I was last Tuesday in Virginia knocking on doors with our 17-year-old daughter for the Democratic nominee who garnered record-breaking numbers of votes and yet did not prevail in the race against a new entrant in politics for the Republicans, Glenn Youngkin. As somebody who comes from the historic debate at the Democratic Leadership Council about where's the party, how are we going to make a deal? And as we sit, people are probably looking at their phones to see if a vote has yet to be scheduled on the president's agenda today, right, for any part of it. So I'm going to ask our panel to start by answering this question. There are many things we probably need to do to bring the Democratic Party back together to move a progressive agenda forward, both in campaigns and in governing. But what is the most important thing we need to do right now, John?
Vote, right? I mean, the reality is that when we're talking process, we're losing. Matter of fact, when Republicans talk process, they're losing. Yeah. I mean, some of Trump's worst numbers in his presidency was when the Republicans were trying to repeal ACA, right? Process really gets in the way of message. It always overshadows any message that you try to drive out there. And so the reality is that...
When you say vote, you don't mean electorate voters, you mean legislative votes in Congress today.
Get BIF done, get the Building Back Better done. These are incredibly popular things, not because they're politically popular, but they're actually going to have an impact on people's lives. And so the fact is that voters are always in the what have you done for me lately mentality. And so I think that we have the tools in the toolkit to be competitive in 2022, because we will have a strong message about what we will be doing and for working families and seniors and small businesses. We have the ability to have a really strong message if it is not blurred and fogged by process and inter-party squabbles, et cetera. I mean, think about it. Next year, what is it? There's going to be $6 billion spent on paid communication. Right. We have the ability to, again, let the American electorate and swing voters, Joel and I were just talking about the importance of swing voters, independent voters. You have to persuade people, right? It can't just be about mobilization. I think we have the tools in the Democratic Party and this presidency and the agenda to do that. And we're gonna have to learn from what just happened in the last couple months and implement that.
Well, you raise a good point, which is not just telling people what the benefits are, but Americans know what they're experiencing. Karen, what do we have to do today?
So two things. Number one, Democrats need to reclaim our narrative. Right. Because to John's point, why we ever let this become a conversation about 3.2 versus 1.5 versus 1.3 Two, instead of talking about the things we've done, by the way, with like the COVID Recovery Act, the ways we got, shots in arms, money in people's pockets, childcare, universal pre-K, help for seniors, expanding the Affordable Care Act, reclaim the narrative about what it is we're fighting about for. We also need to do a better job of making the narrative be about the Republicans, because we let it be about us. So when I say reclaim the narrative, I mean that in a fulsome way, because I don't think people understand enough. They see what's changing or not changing in their lives, but I'm working in a race in North Carolina. People are hurting. They are still really hurting. So while we're fighting about whether or not we should do childcare, I can tell you there are businesses in cities in this country that can't open till 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock when school lets out, so the teenager can go home and watch the kids so mom can go to work, right? That's how people are living right now. The second big thing I would say, I know you asked for one, but I just think this is so
You're always an overperformer in that way.
I am. Even with one vocal cord, I'm an overperformer. Looking at least on this one, I firmly believe that if Democrats do not pass voting rights legislation, forget it, game over. I don't care if you pass Build Back Better, because to black voters, it's the number one thing. Think about how in Virginia, it was relatively easy to vote, and people voted at record numbers. Now let's say you take away early voting, you take away vote by mail, you make it harder for people when they show up at the polls, which is what will happen if we don't get these tools that are in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act passed. And listening to black voters who say, why am I gonna stand in line for 6 hours again when y'all controlled everything and you didn't help me on the thing that is the most important.
John, I'm going to ask you to answer that, and then I'm going to pull one of you. I have a follow-up when you're done with that answer for you, please.
Why do Democrats have a challenge right now? They're a big, messy coalition of people from a variety of backgrounds and views. They're a coalition party. Inherently, that creates a level of messiness. It's not terribly different than what it was the last time Democrats had control of the government in 2009. What is different is you had a real margin then in the House and the Senate. You've got neither now. You've got a vote in the Senate by virtue of having a Democratic vice president, and you've got effectively the same thing in the House, because there are a couple of House Democrats who are probably not going to vote for this bill, whatever it looks like in the end. So you've effectively got a sort of 51-49 majority in both chambers. It's hard to put together a really ambitious agenda when you have that. So I think that's the structural problem. The momentary challenge is that the country's in a sour mood. They're sick of COVID, 18 months of at minimum disruption, oftentimes much worse than disruption. It's affecting every element of their lives, including their children if they're parents. And they're now seeing the after effects in their pocketbook. Supply chain screwed up, everything's taking longer to get. If you can get it, it costs more money. People are just in a foul mood, and when they're in a foul mood, they take it out on the party in power. Who's in power in Jersey and Virginia? Democrats are. So it's not terribly complicated to me what happened. I'm not terribly surprised. If you do compare it to 2009, though, it's striking to look at, because in 2009, Bob McDonnell won the governorship by 17 points. Yeah. Youngkin won it by 2. So it does show that the power of polarization is very powerful, and that there's less sort of slack in the line. McAuliffe won Fairfax by 30 points on Tuesday. He won Loudoun County by 11 points. I mean, how much do we hear about Loudoun County, right? So those suburbs are still Democratic leaning, even in a tough environment. I think that's the good news for Democrats, is that a lot of those voters, I think, are now on their side. Fairfax especially is remarkable to me. In 2000, Bush and Gore, it was a 50-50 county. Mm-hmm. And now McAuliffe loses and carries it by 30. Why did he still lose? Because you're getting crushed in rural areas. The Democratic Party is never going to win in lots of rural Virginia, all right? But there's a huge difference between losing 70-30 and losing 85-15, or losing 90-10. that's just not sustainable if you were trying to win a statewide race. If a Republican is halfway decent and you have a good environment if you're Republicans. And so I think the party has got momentary challenges on the mood of the country, longer term challenges on messaging to rural voters and in some cases ex-urban voters. And they have to figure out how to do that and keep their big, messy coalition all on the same side. It's not easy because it is a party that includes everybody from socialists to country clubbers. That's a pretty wide tent,
Jonathan, I'm going to ask the quick follow-up, and then I want Mr. Anzalone to dive in here for a second, because I think it impacts this. I've heard from people who negotiate legislatively, diplomatically, business-wise in the last 3 months that part of this losing the narrative on the infrastructure bill, on the reconciliation bill, on the Build Back Better bill, is really about the media reporting every tit for tat for moment. Not to point the finger at the media.
Please do.
In an era of LBJ, let's say, even in an era of Clinton and Gingrich, there wasn't the blow-by-blow negotiation. This concept that everybody thought we started at $3 trillion, and now that's a disappointment to be at 1.75, and the role of the media in that. And I ask this in the frame of the Democratic Party because this is about a debate within the Democratic Party, the negotiation within the Democratic Party about moving President Biden's agenda forward. Thoughts on that?
Well,
No, it's for you.
I have thoughts on it.
I was going to say, no, that one's on you, brother.
the coverage is reflective of the legislative wrangling.
Right.
If this had been pushed through with not a lot of debate and little consternation, the coverage would have reflected that. You've got, again, effectively one-seat majorities in each chamber. And so, of course, given the nature of the party, that's going to lead to a ugly sausage-making period. And it just so happened that said sausage-making period coincided with the final stretch of 2 gubernatorial campaigns.
Right.
Not great timing for Terry McAuliffe and Phil Murphy.
I think,
Go ahead, Azo.
to be fair, as an observer on the other side of it as political consultant, I think that in the modern era of 24/7, how people get their information in multiple modes during the day, right? I mean, right? I mean, we sit down with Gail King in the morning, and then we're checking the your Twitter feeds or whatever, and then I'm getting NBC News alerts, right? Everyone says it. You go into a focus group, and they may get information 3 or 4 times during the day. My bigger point would be this. I actually think starting at about 2000 with Bush, if you look at the modern presidency, is that, quite frankly, the White House, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, they don't really have control of the narrative anymore. I mean, the fact is, it's almost impossible, whether it was Bush in the Iraq War, whether it was Obama and ACA, whether it was Trump and COVID, right? I mean, people are saying, oh, but he was message. Well, he lost the message war. And now, clearly, with Biden and reconciliation. The fact that we even use the term reconciliation tells you that you can, it's really impossible sometimes, not that any of these presidencies shouldn't have some responsibility for losing the message, but it gets taken away from you,
Well,
right?
let me be clear. When I said lose control of the message, I don't just fault the White House. I fault Democrats in Congress as well, because there's a way to be having an argument about what we're wrangling over. That's not about the dollar figure. That's about how much childcare, how much pre-K, and letting the Republicans, which we have done when we've been in this situation, sit back, let the Republicans sit back, and let it be about us.
And here's what's interesting about people who say, oh, we lost the message. The fact is what many people don't see is the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent in frontline districts communicating on Build Back Together and this working agenda for working families. And the fact is that during this entire process, the popularity of the package as a whole or individually has not gone down whatsoever. Now, I don't say that as some victory. What I say is, what I mean by that is, we have the tools in the toolkit to win the message war in the new year when it really matters.
Because that polling, folks, shows that when you focus on every polling memo I get says, talk about when people learn about what's in it.
Right.
I mean, I did work last year on defund the police and George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. When you talk about what's in it, even white suburban Trump women voters were like, oh, well, that's okay.
So let's get under the hood a little bit, right? Because this is kind of the campaign side of it. But the reality is we have caucuses in the House and the Senate, right? These are not the governors. From what I can tell, Democratic governors are saying, just pass it. We can govern if we'll pass it, if we know what's happening, right? There's not a big fight amongst the governors, right? You and I have both been in meetings recently with large numbers of Democratic governors. We know what they think, right? I think many of them have placed calls here, right? We have, which I think aren't necessarily always fairly named, but you have progressive caucuses, right, being led by a tremendously gifted and talented leader on the front end who's represented their voice in the media, with the Congresswoman. You have moderates with a Josh Gottheimer, and then a variety of labels have been applied to Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema lately from all kinds of points of view. And the question becomes, I think for folks is this really a bridge inside of our party, or is this a bridge that you can close in the party and bring, Jonathan, the suburban voters? If we look at the early reports and the deconstruction, it's my peer group, right? Suburban white women, we'll say of a certain age, maybe. Is that how we'll coin it for now? A certain age, Lynn? Okay. And is that really part of binding the Democratic Party, or is that a separate group of people that the Democrats have to bind and then go get with the agenda moving forward? Who wants to start there? I gave you a big bowl of mush.
Well, first, we got our ass kicked with everyone.
Yes.
Right. I mean, so every demographic and every geographic. And I really think it goes to what Jonathan was saying more than anything. You know, let's play the hypotheticals, right? If we're all being honest with each other. If BIF and reconciliation had been passed a month ago, are the vote, what we saw in New Jersey and Virginia, all that different? I'm not so sure, because the atmospherics, like 75% of the people think that the economy is going negative job rate.
It's devastating.
Yeah,
Right track. It's the fact that no one could have imagined Delta, right, happening, et cetera. I mean, they're just in a sour mood. Whether you would have had a Democrat or a Republican president, I'm not sure it matters. Again, it's where you go, right? I mean, we can sit here and talk about
that's
why
the question.
Right? It's where we go.
What do we have to do?
And the fact is that if there's a silver lining about Tuesday, there's only one silver lining, and it's November of 2021, and not September of 2022. Like I really believe that.
If we pay attention.
Well, right.
If we do our work.
But you know what I'm saying?
We're not always so good at
We're not always so
actually
good at it. All I can say is, again, I keep using this term, maybe it's overused. We can have a really strong message about the party that is helping working families and seniors and small businesses. And by the way, I think that we actually have the best contrasting message in many, many cycles, because there's not one Republican who's going to be voting for lowering health care, not one Republican voting to lower prescription drugs, elderly care, child care, et cetera, and they're doing it to protect those up at the top and big corporations. We have the structure to have a really good message and be competitive.
Yeah.
And this is the difference between getting your ass kicked and just having a not kind of a bad night.
Jonathan, can let's say Democrats all had a big kumbaya, passed everything they wanted to pass, and be honest, I mean, President Biden and Vice President Harris are sort of a cleanup team coming in to clean up. That's how a lot of us believe. Can they do that? Can they still bring the rest of the country with them by November 2022? Or is the anger going to linger?
I think that some of these policies could be far-reaching and have significant long-term impact politically and culturally on American life. I just think in the short term, and by the short term I mean the midterms, that the bigger issue is going to be the quality of life for most Americans.
Yeah.
Are we out of COVID? Have we gotten the closest thing to herd immunity possible? The supply chain gotten fixed, inflation being tamed. I think that's going to drive the midterms more than anything else.
But this is what I mean in part by reclaiming the narrative. We're not going to be out of COVID. We already know that. The doctors and scientists have already told us that.
Damn.
So we have to stop making it about...
Jonathan's leaving now. He's angry over that. And
But honestly, as someone who is healing with a health challenge, I can tell you, there is no forward and back. It's twists and turns. Instead of making it, we're going to be out of COVID, we're in COVID, we've got to tell the American people, look, there's going to be twists and turns. we're going to help you be prepared to keep yourself and your family safe. Because if the marker is out of COVID, we've already lost. We know that's not going to happen. We've already been told that. So again, that's what I mean in part by changing the narrative about what success looks like. What are the ways that we can help people feel some relief, help change the mood of the country, speak to their deeper concerns, and again, make people feel in their day-to-day life that something changed. Because when I do work with, in focus groups and polling, that's what I always hear is like, is it better now than it was 6 months ago? Well, yeah, I'm working and I'm getting $15 an hour so I can pay rent, afford childcare. The childcare's back open. I can afford groceries. I mean, it sounds overly simplistic. The second thing, though, I wanted to say just on a tactical, we are a different kind of Big Tent party than we were the last time. The kinds of differences between us and the kinds of leaders. And I do think that part of what each of these caucuses has to understand is you're dependent on each other. You're going to go up or down together. There seems to be this, I understand why the Progressive Caucus is trying to leverage to get the child care package, I'm not going to call it what you called it, and infrastructure done, before infrastructure. They think they've got their leverage. But what they and the moderates don't understand is if you get nothing done, they're acting as if they don't get, well, then you're all going to be in trouble. And again, that's part of why I say with regard to voting rights, that's one thing, just the physical ability of our people to actually vote for us is going to be a lot harder without that legislation. So I think, as much as people want to attack Joe Manchin is Joe Manchin. He knows his state. He knows what it takes to win and stay elected. So stop whining about it, cut the deal, get it done. And then remember that the whole goal is to elect more Democrats to get more done.
Yeah. It's interesting for members of our audience, in case they're not aware, and some of you may know the numbers far better than I, but a reminder to folks that in Virginia, you had record turnout on both sides.
26%,
right?
better than 17.
Compared to 2017. Also, because you had a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature, you had much more progressive voting access legislation passed last year. So this year was the first time in Virginia where you had early voting, right? So in 2017, there had been vote by mail, wasn't exercised, people weren't familiar with it, and it was about 195,000, I think. Whereas early vote combined both vote by mail and early vote in person this year was pushing 1.3 to 1. I think we pushed it up to 1.3.
But isn't that cold comfort for Democrats?
Well, yes,
no,
but it's
a
also
lesson learned.
an important message, which is not our panel's topic, and I think others will get to it. But it's important. It's an important message on voting rights to Republicans that it can work for you too.
Well, yeah, but it's also a lesson learned. It's a lesson learned. The bottom line is, we also have to learn from ass kickings. And one of the lessons learned is that you can't just mobilize into an election win.
There it is.
Terry got 200,000 more votes than Northam. The campaigns was based on mobilization. Important, incredibly important, right? But let me tell you what, Stacey Abrams, who came really close in 18, just didn't do mobilization, she did persuasion.
2-33, folks. We had our first persuasion versus mobilization argument here on the panel.
But the thing is that every campaign,
2:33 p.m.
campaigns that win do both.
Exactly.
There we go.
And the fact is that not only do you do both, but you show up everywhere and you narrow the margins in the rural areas, et cetera. And so that I think is a big lesson. I don't really know what happened in New Jersey. We shouldn't take, we talk a lot about Virginia, but we should take no comfort because
100%.
you're in the first and third most expensive media market, Joel, right? I mean, it's like, so I don't know what was going on up there, but there was less about the TV ads and persuasion than it was about the atmospherics, right?
But you also, New Jersey actually bucked history. It didn't.
Yeah.
It collapsed under
Right.
conventional
Yeah.
wisdom.
Right,
I mean, it's the
right.
first time a Democrat's been elected successively in 44 years. But I want to come back to this agenda for Biden for a minute and what's happening here. So
Can I just say one fast thing, though, please?
Please, sir.
That both parties should pay attention to, even though they might not want to. Democrats have to realize that the early vote is not a panacea.
Correct.
That massive voter turnout is not going to guarantee election success, okay? It's not. You're going to lose high turnout elections. You did in the House last year. You did again in Virginia. It's not a guarantee. And for Republicans, guys, you don't have to do these voting laws to suppress the vote. You can win high turnout elections. You did it in the House last year, and you just did it again in a fairly purple state in Virginia. So, like, why are you passing
Why be
these
afraid?
laws?
Why be afraid?
And I think both parties sort of, it's for different reasons, want to avoid those things, and they're pretty obvious now.
Okay, I want to take us back to this issue of, so we have a Democratic Speaker of the House, we have a Democratic Majority Leader, we have a Democratic President and a Democratic Vice President, right? I want to make sure people understand that the Vice President's in this too, right?
Yeah.
In moving this agenda forward. And we have 2 caucuses, and then we have caucuses within the caucuses of the Senate and the House. And who's in charge? We're 6 months into this and no deal. What role does the leadership have now? You have Steny Hoyer in press conferences last week saying, I don't know, my hands are, So who makes, Karen, Manchin sit down, right, with Premier? I mean, who makes that happen? Who makes that moment happen?
Look, I think it's between the president and the leadership in the Senate. I mean, look, and I think it's about how do we sweeten what do we got to do to sweeten the pot for him? I mean, this is what I mean by some of the negotiating that's happening. My mother used to say this to me when I was a child. You're negotiating with power you don't have, right? In some instances, as Dems are negotiating, it's like, okay, but if you can't get Joe Manchin on this, then we just can't do it. We have to let that go and figure out what we can get done.
Isn't that ultimately what legislating is about, or
Yes,
moving
it's
forward? Do you let
theory.
perfection get in the way of the good?
This is not, the 1960s and LBJ. Everyone wants to believe that there's magic fairy dust that the administration or Pelosi or Schumer can sprinkle
That's right.
on a Joe Manchin or a Kirsten Sinema, or my favorite tweet of the day that Jonathan said, I thought we knew the list of names and now it was Carolyn Bordeaux and Cano, right? Like, it just takes one. Like, the margins are that narrow.
That's right.
And, the fact is that strength can be in one person's voice to mess up the whole system. I'm not saying that as some big criticism. Like you said, the guy knows his state, et cetera, et cetera. Does he surprise us? Does he, disappoint us or whatever at different times? I didn't understand the press conference this week. But the fact is that, the criticism that there's this, again, magic fairy dust from Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer to get everyone in line, we are beyond that stage. And, I don't know, maybe while we're sitting here, there was a vote.
I think Nancy Pelosi would have a slight objection to that observation, given the fact that she had the President of the United States come to her caucus twice in a month time, and neither time did he deliver what he was supposed to deliver, which was getting the House to take a vote that day. I think she definitely thought there was going to be at least some dust.
Hard ass, you mean?
Perhaps not magic dust, but some dust brought to the Capitol.
There's only one problem with
he
that.
didn't drop it.
There's only one problem with that. There's only one problem with that, which was, there was also negotiations going on. Everyone thinks it's simple. Everyone thinks it's easy.
It's
right?
not. No, it's not.
And it's not. I mean,
So let's talk for just a minute about what's in this agenda and what could be driving agreement as we speak, right? Because I think that was one of the most interesting things I've seen done, and I do understand what Senator Manchin was saying in that press conference. I got it. It doesn't mean I agree with everything he's done, but I got it. The power to pass the infrastructure bill sits right there in the House. You can do it today. Don't blame me for that. You can do it. You've decided to lock these together, is what he said. Fair game. But what's interesting to me is the way coming right out of that caucus meeting, the Progressive Caucus chair came out and said, yeah, we're for both of them. We sign off on both things right now, but won't agree for the vote to be delivered yet.
Because they think that that's their leverage, right? Is that they're going to, but because she had also said, we agree, I'm so tired of this, like, we agree in spirit.
In theory,
we have to see the specifics.
Right.
So get to the specifics and let's get agreement.
So what delivers the message? Does the loss in Virginia deliver the message to both caucuses?
I think that's what we're going to learn. And I mean, seriously, I think we're going to learn.
That the political cost is what has to say, time's up, go?
Let's hope.
Harry died so Biff could live. Politically.
Wow. I was like, that was a little dramatic.
No, but
that was a little
seriously.
dramatic.
Politically.
Yeah.
I was saying this on Sunday.
Possibly.
Sadly, it wasn't public, but I was telling some friends Sunday. I said, this is not going to undermine the bills. This is going to accelerate the legislation. It's going to be the final kick in the ass. Oh, kick in the behind. Sorry, she's banned. Needed was the loss in Virginia. You add to that the near loss in New Jersey, and I think that's the final emphasis.
It's like a chaser.
Yeah, of like, all right, this has to get done. Otherwise, we're facing a real challenge.
You know what's really important was
Cold comfort for Terry McAuliffe, by the way. Can you imagine if you're Terry McAuliffe, today's jobs numbers come out, well, they're like 500,000 jobs gained, unemployment fell 0.02%, and they passed this agenda over the weekend. I mean, that's got to...
One more week.
That's got to...
Timing is everything in life.
Right?
As many of you know, I brag on my husband because he ran Doug Wilder's campaign for governor, the historic campaign
Joe.
in Virginia. And he said the other night, for many of us in the room, Terry McAuliffe's not just a public servant we admire, but he's a close friend we've known for many years in different roles. And so it stings a little bit more on that front. And Joe said, we can analyze this one to death, but the reality is Democrats were elected to govern, and we weren't governing at the time when his election took place. And you have to give props to the other campaign. No loss is ever in a vacuum, right? But what it means is, I guess, John, one of the questions I'd be curious about that you might think as somebody who deals with the long-term strategy is how much time you need. Let's say the legislation passes between now and Thanksgiving, which, by the way, we keep saying Thanksgiving like that's far off, and I don't know if anybody else has done that
Right.
shopping. It is not.
It is
It's like
soon.
a week and a half away. Or 2 weeks from yesterday, right? I mean, is that enough time?
Enough time for what?
Is that enough time to show the progress of the Biden-Harris agenda?
So listen, I think
send
that
it
we have to keep expectations at a minimum because of what Jonathan was saying. The atmospherics are awful out there. And by the way, during if they vote on all this stuff, we still have the debt limit in December. Yeah. We still have all the media around the supply chain and not being able to get Christmas gifts and shipping and the prices going up and all that type of stuff.
Personal experience in December.
I just think, listen,
Oh my God.
there's something about hitting the reset button on a new year, and I think that we won't see a whole lot of anything until the first quarter or the end of the first quarter. I mean, that's just, I think, the reality of how slow the ship moves in terms of the atmospherics.
Right, Karen, timing, what do you think?
Well, I was going to answer a different question.
You know what? You can answer any question you want.
So I agree on the timing. I completely agree with that. I think the other thing we have to pay attention to and learn a lesson from, you talked about white voters, I believe it was a 15% swing of white women, suburban women. We have to stop being afraid to talk about race as Democrats. We have to. I have been in meetings where people said, let's just not talk about CRT, and I'm like, it's not going anywhere. We're going to have to, because we have to speak to, granted in Virginia, this parental rights frame encompassed a couple of different things. Mm-hmm. But the point is, we know that creating a moral panic works. It is a tried and true tactic. We can't just think, yes, we'll pass Build Back Better, we'll pass reconciliation, people will be feeling better. But I think part of what New Jersey taught us is there is still this other, and what Virginia taught us, there's other things going on with part of our electorate that we have to be able to speak to and understand what fear is being triggered in people. As somebody said, somebody tweeted that how many of those folks, that percentage of white women, suburban families, had Black Lives Matter signs in their yards a year ago?
Yeah.
We have to understand what's going on there in order to win, because, again, particularly in these Senate races, in order to win statewide and get the kind of multi-generational, multicultural coalition that it will take to win, we're going to have to figure that out, I firmly believe.
Jonathan, timing?
Timing is everything in life, right? Yeah, look, I guess I'm just not terribly surprised about what happened given the timing, given where the country is, given the kind of natural pendulum swinging back. I remember talking to an editor in June, right before I went on book leave, and for those watching on C-SPAN, I have a book coming out next year, Simon & Schuster with Alex Burns. about American politics the last 2 years. Please pre-order.
What's it called?
Working on the title right now, but stay tuned. Jonathan Martin, Simon & Schuster next year, C-SPAN. And it's not called Shameless, but I am shameless.
He's also a booker on the side, but that's...
Yeah, you know, the pendulum swings, and because of the polarization that I mentioned earlier, because we are in these blue and red silos increasingly, I think that maybe Democrats took a little bit too much comfort in the fact that, you know, Virginia, it's gotten so blue. It's just, even in a tough cycle, we're going to be okay. I heard a lot of that. And it's pretty compelling because the polarization is the most animating force in politics today. But I can remember talking to an editor 6 months ago before book leave, and I said, hey,
For the book you're writing?
the book coming out next year that Simon & Schuster is
He had to have a book
publishing.
leave in order to produce it. Go ahead,
Exactly.
keep going.
Louisiana has got a Democratic governor.
great
Vermont's
governor.
got a Republican governor. Governor's races are different animals, and especially when they're held in off years. It's much more of a referendum on the state and on the message of the candidates than it is simply registering your tribal preference, red or blue. And
It's often who wins the message war. John Bell Edwards won the message war
well, he had a
against
great
Bitter.
pollster too.
Thank you.
So, who was that
Who was
again?
that pollster?
But
All right,
it's
I'm
true.
going to
Doug Schoen,
reclaim,
I think.
forget the narrative, I'm reclaiming the panel.
Sorry.
because it's not here. Okay, so a couple things, because I am the moderator, I get to do a couple things here
Please.
at the end. Number one, because I believe in governors, and I think the Senate and House are critical next year, there's nothing more critical than governors' races, right? Regardless of who controls the House or Senate next year, governors are going to be who drive an economy locally, governors are going to be who deal with voting rights, governors
voting, yeah,
are
I
going to
was
be
gonna say,
who deal with disinformation, right?
Yes.
We've gone through this entire panel without saying the name of he who shall be nameless, which is kind of impressive and a demonstration of where things may or may not be. And I'm pleased to report that that wasn't the topic. But we also didn't talk about, but Karen alluded to, we didn't talk about education, which I think is really a euphemism now for a lot of things.
Yeah.
What happened to parents and their kids through COVID, where they're coming back to, right? Education doesn't mean books and teachers' unions and salaries now.
Three-dimensional.
Education means, and I say this as the mother of a 17-year-old girl in a public school system who's blessed to have a lot the resources to protect her through COVID. But I think that's a big thing coming for us next year. And even if you feel like, even if the economy's going well, and the rest of it's going well, that suburban women's vote, even if you disagree with the protesters at the school board meetings, the chaos of the school board meetings in your town and community where you know people sitting on those boards
Yes.
is frightening to you.
So
frightening.
education used to be about funding and teacher pay.
Right.
Right.
And now it's not. I mean, right now, because of COVID, I'm pissed off
It's
because
about
last
children's
April,
safety.
my kids were online instead of in school. It's about critical race theory. It might be about what, Youngkin did,
About
which
what-
was parental.
It's about what people believe to be safety and
It
health.
is like
Right.
it's a battleground.
kid, too.
It's a battleground.
All right, Karen, last word, and we got to go because McIntyre's giving me, no, we don't have to go?
No.
Let's do it live.
I
Let's
got
go.
a 3-minute warning.
Okay, what I was going to say.
Thelma and Louise,
Back
let's keep
up.
going.
Oh, I misread her hand.
Having worked at the New York City Board of Education when it was the New York City Board of Education, I can tell you, the second that I saw those stories about school board meetings being packed,
Yeah.
I knew we were in trouble because nobody goes to those things usually. Nobody, right? Not a lot of people actually know who's on their school board locally. What are the Republicans doing? They're running people in school board races. They're very focused. Why? And Youngkin did a good job of this. Most parents don't realize governors have a lot of control over the curriculum. And so, as well as masks and teachers and all that. What do Republicans do? I think Youngkin did a good job of controlling the narrative in
Yeah.
Virginia about schools and speaking to those suburban parents and scaring them, creating a different environment on that issue. And when it's about your child, of course you're going to have a different type of anxiety. So again, I think if we don't figure that out and pay attention to it,
So Karen, let me ask you a question though, because this is a difference between rural counties.
Yeah.
The concept that people don't know who's on their school board, they do in the rural counties.
Yes, they do. They do in Texas,
Their
too.
brother-in-law, their sister-in-law, their friend at church ran for it. Like neighbors go and get somebody to run for it even before it was part of a networked effort at the national level. And so I think that's a big deal. And given that education is really governed, right, at the state and local level, John, that's a question about what can Democrats do cohesively to alleviate all of those elements, all of the fear that's being driven around that?
Well, first of all, I think that the key is that Republicans often just do a better branding job on us, right? I think that we did a really good job in 2020 with Biden in terms of every time we got hit, we knocked it down. Like, whether it was, defund, whether it was he was too radical, whether it was he was going to raise taxes, we just didn't take any of it, and we hit back and we pivoted. And the fact is that you have to control the narrative, right? Or tell a different narrative, one or the other.
Right.
But the fact is that, listen, Republicans, they don't have an economic agenda. They don't run it on anything right now. They are going to run on critical race theories, people coming over the border.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is what they're, and, inflation and
But do we
like
have
that.
agreement on an economic agenda
Well,
in the Democratic Party to
but
run on?
hey, we at least, even if we're at 98% there, we do have an agenda.
But that's not what people see. They're seeing this fight over the bill.
Right, but listen, when we're in September of 2022, it's going to pass. We're going to get something passed. We're going to have something to say. My point is that the Republicans are going to be doing defund police, critical race theories, and immigrate in the border.
Mm-hmm.
That is there, and we're going to get in social. We've got to get a handle on how we are going to respond, pivot, and attack.
Well, you please go ahead.
I was just going to say, remember there was the after-election report done by, I want to say, Latino Decisions, Third Way, and Collective PAC.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that was interesting, a couple of things actually, those candidates, and this goes back to the persuasion mobilization, but I'm a big believer in persuasion, but those candidates who had done a better job up front early on in their campaign in cementing their narrative withstood the disinformation and misinformation campaigns and things like defund the police much better than those who didn't. Mm-hmm. So in terms of, to Anzo's point, part of figuring that out is figuring that out early. January, I agree, January is when people are really going to be paying attention early, so that when you are batting that, part of why I think Biden was effective at batting it down is he also came in with a known brand. People, they could not make it stick that this nice guy, who sometimes said wacky things, was this radical socialist. Right. Because of so part of it is, I think, it will be about establishing our brand. We got to get this legislation passed in part to do that.
It feels like Groundhog Day,
Yeah,
talking about establishing a brand of the party. Go ahead.
Something happened in August, though. I think Biden became much more of a polarizing figure after Afghanistan, and it sort of gave, it really put a dent in his armor. Anzo mentioned this earlier. I don't know if Biden could do it. You can certainly see Bill Clinton, Barack Obama doing it. I think there's a way for Democrats. Look, you're never going to totally defang the Republicans' cultural attacks, especially given the fodder they have now. That's going to have salience. But I think what you mentioned earlier, if Biden was willing to do it and do it relentlessly, is say, you lay out the most popular parts of this bill, you say, I passed this bill, but you know what? It was ugly. You know why? I had to do it with only my party. I couldn't get one Republican to support paid leave. I couldn't get one Republican to support the expanded child tax credit. I couldn't get one Republican. You can see that kind of a litany and sort of a much more partisan Joe Biden laying the wood to Republicans for their refusal to compromise on very popular individual items and taking that on the road. Is he willing to do that? Could he drive that message given his penchant for not always being on message? I don't know the answer to that, but that certainly would be one way to drive an offensive midterm message.
Let me ask you guys another tactical question. Let's speed ahead. Democrats prevail. I think we'd probably all agree that if Democrats prevail, the margins continue to be tight. In a really good day, not as tight as they are now. We've got some real opportunities as Democrats next year. And given what Karen said in her opening, one of the two most important things she thinks the Democratic Party has to do today to win and to move the Biden-Harris agenda forward is voting rights. So voting rights naturally takes you to the filibuster argument, right? Even where a Senator Joe Manchin, as a former Secretary of State, has noted that there is some adjustments he'd be willing to look at for some of that. So filibuster after what we've been through? Anybody want to pick that one up and go? I've never seen all three of them that quiet.
I don't see a scenario.
It just takes one person to say no.
I just don't see a scenario where Senator Sinema is going to bend on the filibuster, and I'd be surprised.
A modified filibuster, the way Manchin's willing to go?
Wear a jean jacket on the floor again.
I'm skeptical that either of them would move on the filibuster. Him, maybe, because he obviously is more known to falling in line eventually with the party.
Well, he's also got a history of Secretary of State.
Yeah.
He has a point of view on this, very specific.
Well, look,
And he knows it impacts his voters too.
I think both of them would be supportive of a voting bill. I just am very skeptical that they're going to blow up the filibuster. Very skeptical.
Nobody sees that changing at all.
Look, I think we have to do a lot more work around making it seem and feel less radical. And again, claim the narrative about why we're doing it, what we're doing in terms of, I mean, I think Jim Clyburn has done a good job in talking about it when it comes to constitutional rights. So that because I do think if people feel, as much as I'm happy to do away with the filibuster, I do think people feel like that seems too much, too scary. And I mean, but most Americans, by the way, have no idea what the filibuster
Well,
is.
this goes to John's concern. Why are we having a debate about
Exactly.
process? It's kind of procedural.
And
That's right.
will we have the stomach to go through a process fight after going through a 2.5-month process
Right.
fight? Like, everyone needs to.
So here's a question. So let's say Democrats prevail again this week. I'm going to use the term weak loosely. Weak is kind of, expandable. And those
said no.
and the two big bills pass, right? The president gets to sign them. If you're Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, do you just go, shh, everybody go home for the holidays? Or do you go running after?
I think you have to say that you're going to do something on voting after the holidays. I really do, because I think otherwise you're going to have civil rights leaders, all the folks who have been fighting on this. You want everybody to go home and, to what Jonathan keeps coming back to, feel like they're having a good Thanksgiving because we got something done.
Or be online trying to find the toy that they can't find because of.
And I think if you're the president, you're going back to, okay, if I can't get Congress to move on the filibuster, what other things that I haven't been able to do can I do?
And what can governors gear up for in their spring legislatures?
That's right.
I think Biden had one meeting on the port issue, or at least the White House did, but I'm just surprised that they've not been more proactive on trying to do more on that. And
Oh, I think they are.
Yeah, I think every day they're doing
They
that.
are.
hold on, let me finish. Be seen as doing more on the issue. Like, why is Joe Biden not in Savannah at the port with the hard hat on? Like, let's go, you know.
Well, he was in Europe.
Those trucks rolling.
He was in Europe,
trying to
and
get
then
climate.
he is kind of
Yes.
trying to get this deal done.
I'm not
Can
being
I say
literal
real
about
quick?
Savannah, but you get the
All right,
So
so
really quickly, this goes to one, I'll be really quick.
Yeah.
This goes to another thing. We need more of a whole of government approach.
Yeah.
If he can't be there, send the vice president.
Right.
She'll get press if she goes.
Yeah.
Send the transportation secretary.
Right.
Secretary Raimondo, Commerce, yeah.
I don't
She's
care
been out
who
there.
it is.
Raimondo's been
Put
doing
them
it.
all out there on the road
Right.
selling this thing.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a little bit of question now that I'm reading my stage directions correctly. By the way, I'd like to point out it was 3 weeks until Thanksgiving. I was thinking 2 weeks until my son comes home for Thanksgiving.
Oh.
Sorry, just a mom's pride. Okay, questions from the audience. Patrick's got some for us.
Yes, so I'm looking at all of the questions that are coming in on Zoom, and we
Oh.
have a whole bunch of good ones. I'm going to just distill.
We're huge on Zoom.
Huge on Zoom, and I'll just distill a few of them. I think a lot of you have talked about the Democratic message, and a lot of the questions have been about why the Democrats seem to consistently fail. This is what our Zoom audience is saying, at messaging what is sometimes a complex story about, as Jonathan called, a coalition party. What's more challenging about messaging for Democrats than Republicans, if that is indeed the case?
Child.
Karen, why don't you start, and then we'll go to John.
Well, having been a communications director at the Democratic National Committee, I'll start by saying I think part of it is my experience was, we don't have the same kind of trust between the different parts of the party about what's an effective message. Whereas I feel like, and having talked to some of my Republican counterparts, when they say this is what the message is, people just, they go and they believe it and they use it in a way that I feel like, but as an example, in 2006, culture of corruption was a message. A lot of people remember Howard Dean said that. Nancy Pelosi said, that's a little too harsh. And we were like, listing off all the things that were going on, how is that too harsh? It took 6 months to get everybody there. We finally, when they saw that it worked, we were able to get people there. But I think my experience has been that it's just much harder to get our people to have trust that it's going to work.
Well, I'd build on that. I would say two things, and the second part is building on yours, Karen. The first part is like, we have success. Like 2020 in the presidential was a successful message campaign. 2016 was not. 2018 midterms were very successful on healthcare and on et cetera. Sometimes the atmospheres get in the way of it, et cetera, et cetera. But I will also say, and this is the second point of building on it, like, when we have our 220-something congressional races for Democratic incumbents across the country, they all look different because they are different. Like our caucus looks different. When you go out into the Republican campaigns and their 200 congressional campaigns, where their caucus looks like, the boardroom of a country club, right? And they all say the same thing, because they all basically look the same, quite frankly. And you know what I'm saying? It's like, and the reality is we have a diverse party. We have, I can't remember the numbers, like 73% of all women, like 90-something% of all African Americans, like 84% of all Latinos, et cetera, et cetera. And that also means ideologically and geographically. And so, quite frankly, Haley Stevens' campaign in Novi, Michigan, looks a heck of a lot different than Yarmouth's campaign in Kentucky. And that's the reality of it.
Look, I think there are inherent challenges to the Democratic Party that the Republican Party does not have. The Democratic Party is the party of capital and labor. Think about that. Now more than ever, too, because of the cultural shift in this country and because of the fact that there's now much more education polarization than ever before, there's a lot of wealthy, well-educated people who are now Democrats. Well, guess what? They're not on the line as members of the UAW, right? They're oftentimes white-collar professionals. So they have very divergent economic interests. And that's just to start with the economic piece of it. You go beyond that, thinking about other divides, and it's a messy, messy coalition. The Republicans obviously have much more of a adherence to a few things that they express very plainly. What was so fascinating about the Trump era was that he really was a disruption to the kind of command and control, top-down style of the Republican Party, which, as you were talking about, they're so relentlessly on message and discipline. Well, not for the last 5 years. And it was a shock to the system for Republicans to have somebody making news on Twitter because they were so used to this, really powerful message machine.
But they got behind him very quickly.
Yes.
They adapted to it.
They adapted
to it.
They saw it work.
But did it work that well, though?
Right.
They lost the White House, the House, and the Senate.
Well, but let's
Not by much.
Exactly. They lost the message war, too.
They
did.
One of the things that we haven't talked about in this frame as well is the concept of who the Republican Party is now. Now, this panel is actually about the Democratic Party, but it's always in relation, the point to your question, Professor, that when you see numbers today that say, I may not be right, John, but the numbers are pretty high, that 83% of Republicans do not believe President Biden and Vice President Harris were elected legally. And you're like, okay, but who's the Republican Party now when you're getting that? And so who is that big swath of people? We used to just call it the middle. It used to be a third, a third, and a third. Is it still a third and a third and a third? And are the two ends of our caucuses on this legislation negotiating really for Democratic votes, or are they negotiating to that swath in the middle that they're dealing with, right? And so that also hinders messaging to some degree.
Well, the Republicans almost never legislate to the middle. Like, they're not worried about independents and swing voters, and part of that is their brilliance on redistricting. They don't poll general election and swing voters. They poll Republican primary voters because they're worried about getting primaried.
Right.
I mean, that's the reality of it. Democrats really don't have a whole lot of primaries. I mean, some. But no,
I
not
think
like.
that changed a lot the last
Not
three
like
cycles.
the Republicans. The fact is, the best season around in 2022 is going to be the Republican primary season. They're going to try to out, Trump everyone. It is true. I mean, the fact is that one of the things that may benefit us is the fact that we may get a lot of Murdochs, Aikens, Sharon Angles, and O'Donnells.
Yeah.
We might. I mean, we really absolutely might. But the fact is that I think we do legislate to the middle a hell of a lot more, because the stuff that we do is more impactful, right? And it's not we don't legislate just by politics. We legislate by some principle and what we want to do to help people. And the fact is that Republicans often legislate, especially in the state legislatures, are legislating to Republican primary voters because they're worried about primaries.
So let me ask a different kind of question in terms of the legislative impact on Democratic primary politics, right? And that is the concept of 2 cycles ago, it was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming in and saying primary, and the threat of the primary came from the far progressive side. If the legislative result is not what they want, do they come back with that? Is that a threat that Democrats have to worry about in their
I
primaries?
mean, in that 18 cycle, we still got the moderates who won those primaries. I mean, the Gretchen Whitmers, the Steve Sisolaks, all got big, progressive primaries. And they were all good people. I'm not saying anything negative about it, And we got the Tony Evers. The fact is that Democrats' success has been a combination of the progressives plus the moderates. Back in 2006, it also included the Southern conservatives, the Cashews and the Brights and the Melancons. I mean, we needed all those people to get Nancy Pelosi elected. The progressives, the moderates, and the conservatives. We really don't have conservatives anymore.
I also think, Kiki, that there is much more internal pressure on the coalition when they're not in power in the White House. I'm not sure that you could have had Presley, AOC primary victories under a Democratic president, because by the same token, I'm not sure that you could have had the Republican primaries that unseated Bob Bennett in Utah or Dick Lugar in Indiana if that had been under a Republican president, right? It happened when Obama was president. Why? Because both times the anger from the out party for the current president, who they believe is illegitimate, is sort of taken out internally in the primary. And I just don't see that kind of anger internally when you're controlling the White House.
And they want to do something different, right? Like the party that's out always believes that they have to do something
that the
completely
leadership
different.
they have within their party wasn't
Right.
working.
And so
It's not effective.
And so
That's right.
We lost.
That's right. We lost.
The challenges are much more,
Right.
All right. The good professor has another question for us, or a cumulative question.
Exactly. So I have a question about a Democratic governor who faced the very same national political environment as Murphy and McAuliffe,
I think I know you're talking about.
who matched his 2018 election numbers 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Why aren't we talking about Gavin Newsom and the strategy he used to win re-election by double-digit margins, and what's different about that race? There's obvious differences, but is there anything for Democrats to learn from that race compared to what they just did this week?
Stay connected to your voters.
or move to California.
Run in a plus 30
I'm
state.
not really sure.
It's interesting. I'm going to actually dive into
He
that.
got himself
I think I brought to the table in 2016 on the Florence campus, Ellen and Tom, the question of, are we too big to govern as a nation, right? That the concept of the diversity, the diversity we live with today is not the diversity that really the founding fathers and the people who wrote the Constitution were talking about, right?
No.
They were talking about the diversity around a group of landowning, wealthy white men, and who just wanted the ability from a faith perspective to do some different things than we have today. I think California is an example of that, right? The arguments and the debates in California, while shared with some national functions, would you say are California specific? Or would you say have messages to those other gubernatorial races?
Well, listen. First of all, Newsom, or whatever his name is. Gavin Newsom, thank you. His job rating was in the mid to high 50s by the end of it, first of all. And there wasn't an alternative, like literally. Like, was it Gary South? What was the other governor they got? He literally, his job rating was under 50%, and there was actually an alternative.
Gary Davis.
Gary Davis. I can't come up with names today.
I
Good
can
God.
recall the name of the hack who worked for Gary Davis, but not the actual governor himself, which I respect that, actually.
It was the consultant. My point is
it,
that
man.
Schwarzenegger was a real alternative, and there was no real alternative that materialized against Newsom, and his job rating, was, I think, 55, 56%. And so, again, I just love the question, but I don't think there is an apples-to-apples comparison to this cycle.
But let's give credit to Gavin Newsom and his consultants, by the way.
I didn't whatever.
If Sean and Ace are watching on C-SPAN, they did a good job, relentlessly focused on Larry Elder. They didn't have an opponent. They ensured that they de facto had an opponent, though, by making him the face of the opposition. And guess what? He had a 30-year record of talk radio quotes that were inflammatory that they just jammed.
So was that a misapplied lesson in Virginia?
Look,
Think about that for a minute.
You did not have a talk radio host running in a blue state with all kinds of
A
oppo.
fleece vest wearing.
Youngkin was
I think it's a fair
Youngkin was
question.
not scary. Listen, he was not scary. Like, no one was threatened by him. And the Trump thing, like 20% of voters who had a negative perception of Trump voted for Youngkin. People, it was a state race. They're like, oh yeah, the Republican endorses the Republican, right?
And not just
never
that,
stuck.
but Virginia is a white-collar, more upscale educated state. Harder to demagogue the CEO of Carlisle in Virginia, frankly, than it would have been in a place like Michigan or Ohio, just because of the sort of nature of the state.
So let me, now that I'm actually taking my stage directions only from Tom McIntyre, it is time to wrap up for a minute. I'm going to ask one lightning round question, because that seems like what you're supposed to do on a panel. And the question is more bluntly, we've discussed it, but I'm going to ask more bluntly. If the infrastructure package and the Build Back Better agenda package had passed before the Virginia election, do you believe that Terry McAuliffe would have won?
I think that's a little bridge too far. I think what Jonathan said at the very beginning, which was the atmospherics were just so difficult, quite frankly. And I normally would have said yes until I saw New Jersey.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? And the fact is, I think that, that was a problem. And I think that, again, another lesson learned. Like, people come out to vote. Like, no one thought we were going to get this.
So impressive that Terry performed the way he did.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not. My point is that, again, you can't just have a mobilization campaign. You have to have a persuasion campaign.
Second time twice now, Jonathan. And Karen, if those two pieces had passed?
Not necessarily. I agree with Anzo. I think it would have helped.
Yeah.
But I think there were a lot of other factors going on that we're not talking about in Virginia specifically that still were going to make it hard for Terry to win.
I need to phone a friend here. Is that okay?
Who are you
Weston?
phoning? Depends on who.
No, I'm phoning a friend because I'm curious as to what you say when you say past. Are we talking about September or are we talking about last week?
Great question.
Okay? If that had happened in September and Biden's numbers get back above 50 in Virginia and you can actually start like running on stuff and talking about good news and you have a 6-week clip of good press, I think Terry would have a shot.
Or if the infrastructure package had passed when Josh Gottheimer cut the original deal
in August.
with Pelosi, right?
I think last week maybe it shaves off a half a point or less. I don't think it necessarily changes that much. But look, Terry, to his credit, I talked to him on September 21st, I think it was, and he said to me, Democrats need to stop this chit-chatting, get to work, pass this bill. they knew they had a problem, and they knew that Biden's numbers had really collapsed, that they had to get Biden's approval back above 50. And Terry rang that bell in September with me, and we put it on the front page that weekend. They tried repeatedly, and Terry was going on national television, on Dana Bash's show, I think, talking about begging Democrats to pass these bills. Yeah. He called Pelosi constantly. They couldn't get it done. Yeah.
But then how do you account for the fact that, wasn't it ABC News that said had 52% disapproval of Terry on exit polls?
Yeah, I mean, Terry.
That matters too.
It does matter. And the White House folks would say, and did say to me, you know, it wasn't Joe Biden who stood up at the second debate and said parents shouldn't have a role in schools. That was not Joe Biden. That was somebody else.
So
which is fair, right?
We're going to wrap up, and maybe what we can do is take away two things. Number one, celebrate the number of people who voted in Virginia, right? Regardless of for whom they voted, but celebrate that many people showed up to vote. We need to keep that for democracy.
Yes.
And number two, let's take away the timing discussion from this panel today and see where we are on January 1. Get this legislation passed, let people experience the rest of November and December, and hopefully COVID numbers continue to drop, children vaccinated, a healthier, less chaotic experience, and we'll see what the beginning of 2022 brings for us. Thank you to the panelists. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Right.